So I've noticed, certainly in the last few years, how accounting is changing. And it seems as if the modern accountant needs to be an expert in data analytics. There's more data than ever before. The quality of that data is changing. We've not just got numbers in a spreadsheet anymore. We've got quite complex data. And data which almost seems to defy any objective classification. We've got pictures, we've got moving images, and all of these things seem to need to be processed before anyone can make a decision. When I first started doing accounting 20 plus years ago, I was reassured that I didn't need to be good at mathematics to be good at accounting, because I was never good at mathematics at school. And traditionally in accounting, you don't have to be good at mathematics. The most complicated mathematical calculation that you've got to do is to multiply one number by another, or to raise one number to the power of another. And there's really not any advanced mathematics in there now. And it almost seems as if I've been caught off guard. And while I wasn't looking, someone came and introduced a whole load of mathematical analysis into accounting. And now I've almost got to be an expert statistician before I can dare to take any decision. And I'm just really wondering what your take is on that. As someone who is good at mathematical analysis and is very comfortable around statistics, how do you see the progression of statistics and this kind of analysis overtaking other areas of the world?
Yeah, it's exactly what you mentioned. It's been going on not just perhaps in finance, but in lots of other fields that require computation as a tool for, for getting answers to certain problems. And the trajectory of computation has followed this exact same trend where, in the 60s, what computers could do basically was just crunch big numbers together. And that's pretty much what we use them for. Nowadays, there is this explosion of different programming types of languages that are very specific to different types of data, and very specific for specific types of functions that you want to perform. So, for instance, as you were saying, data comes in all shapes and sizes nowadays. Programming languages come specifically devised so that the programmer doesn't just write a little bit of software so that it can read a spreadsheet and compute a few numbers and give you an answer, but you design what is called an object-oriented environment where you create your software entirely in terms of the type of data that you're going to look at. So if you get images, you would design using Python, for instance, an entire environment that is specifically designed for looking at pictures and analyzing bits about the, or maybe some background information about the timing or the size or whatever, but everything has to do with the object that you're looking at. And so as the world moves on and different areas require different types of computation, so do programming languages evolve to the point where we need them nowadays to be very, very specific. For instance, even when you see it nowadays with the US election, what is the type of data we're looking at? We want to get voters, we want to get their racial profile, we want to get their age, we want to get their profession, their education. So we need an environment that can understand all this type of data and give us information, squeeze information, which is the important bit here, information out of this data that is useful to us. And in particular in the world of finance, when exactly like you were explaining, so it's not about taking a number to an exponent anymore, it's grabbing data and figuring out, how do we actually how could we price certain things? How could we assess risk or pricing of certain items? So the world is changing, and the way that we understand data and the way we use data and what we want out of data is evolving. So these programming languages have to evolve alongside with us. You can see the progress, and you can especially see it in high-level programming languages like Python, which is used everywhere, that is moved away from crunching numbers to, okay, what type of data do you want to deal with? Fine, create your own little tool. You can use me to create your own tools to deal with this specific type of data.
So tell me more about this Python malarkey then. So I'm hearing about Python. I'm walking along the cliff face of my ignorance, and one more step should see me plunging into the icy crevice below. What is Python?
So you have a computer, and it cannot communicate with us. There's no way I can talk to computer, and computer cannot talk to me. Computer understands zeros and ones, I don't. So we need a way to communicate with them, and that's when these high-level programming languages come in, which are essentially ways in which we can provide instructions that then get translated to computer language, so then the computer can, work for us. So Python is one of these very intuitive high-level programming languages, and it only is just a way in which you can write instructions in a very intuitive way, and it uses the English language as the starting point. So most of the commands are written in English. Once we see some of that next week, you will notice that it's very intuitive, it's very easy to understand, and it's very easy to know what it is that you're telling computer you want to do. Python is a programming language that is often called an object-oriented language, which is, it separates it from other programs like C++ or Java that are more task-oriented and not object-oriented. So task-oriented means I want to do this, I'll program according to this, whereas object is I'm getting this object, I want to create my environment according to the object, not the task. And so Python is pretty much, when it comes to the world of finance, you can see it in banking and analysis, in cryptocurrencies, and in trading, because it's good at many things that have to do with data analysis. And in particular, it's a very fast programming language, which means computers can read its instructions really quickly. So you could do very quick things like trading. It's used in ATM machines that are written using Python.
Okay.
And so if you know how to use Python, not only does it translate because you can use other programming languages, because they're all in a sense very similar, but it's a widely used software because first of all, it's freeware, it's updated very often, it has a huge community of people that are constantly contributing to the development of the software, and it has what we call libraries, which are chunks of software that are already written for us, developed for a particular task, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel anytime. If you have to figure out a problem, you're probably not the only one. There's probably thousands of people that need to do that. So there's bits of software that has been developed and optimized to the nth degree, so that we can all grab that little bit of software and apply it to whatever we want to do.
So I could maybe take samples of other people's programs in that sense, yeah, piece them together to do what I want to do, rather than having to start everything from scratch.
Correct. And there's a lot of the spirit of the community is it's very free. So more often than not, you will encounter people giving up their very clever and fast algorithms for doing certain tasks for free, and you can adopt it. You don't have to reference anybody, it just becomes part of the community. And you learn from other people just talking to them and figuring out how they actually, went around a certain problem, how they tackled this, and how are they able to manage so much data so quickly and extract exactly what they were looking for. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of Python. I've used other programming languages in the past until I found Python and realized they're really onto something. It's a very good programming language.
So let me think of an example that typically, as an accountant in practice, I'd be dealing with. I might be sat at my desk producing the year-end accounts. I've got a long list of receivables in front of me. I can see all these people owe me money. In order to produce the financial statements, so we're not even at the level of business management here. This is not necessarily a business decision. This is a reporting decision. I've got to somehow predict who out of that long list of debtors is going to pay me, and when they're going to pay me, and how much they're going to pay me. In other words, I need to try to predict something about the uncertain future of when I'm going to get paid. Can I use code to write myself a program that will do that for me?
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the most useful things with programming. And you probably heard of this buzzword, this term in the past, machine learning, which is essentially, I mean, it sounds really ominous and sort of nebulous in a sense. And machine learning means we're actually just teaching a computer to perform a very specific task, not by telling it what to do, but by telling it what we want. And so over and over, we feed computers. And again, when I mean feed and when I mean train, you're in the background, I'm always assuming we use a programming language like Python. But you're constantly feeding computer data, and you're saying, look, out of this data, this is what I want, this is what I don't want. So next time you see this, yes. Next time you see this, that's a no. And it's a very, in a sense, it's a complicated process. But the basics of it are, you constantly tell computer, these things are good, these things are bad, learn them over and over and over. So in the future, whenever you get, for instance, a receipt, it will predict, depending on where it comes from, and, and considering its historical record, what is the probability that this is going to be, they're going to owe you this much, or is going to be outstanding, or, whatever it is, it will give you a good probability of what this type of data will be, provided that it got a lot of data, similar data in the past. The quintessential example to kind of ground this a little bit is you can feed a computer a lot of pictures of cats, right? You scrape the internet as much as you want, and you get all the billions of pictures of cute little kittens.
There are a lot of cats on the internet.
And there are plenty, exactly, which is great for training a machine. So you tell it, this is a cat, this is a cat, this is a cat. Anytime you see a cat, it will, you'll tell it, you'll write it, it's a cat. Whenever you feed it a picture of a horse, the machine will halt and say, I have no idea what this is, but it's certainly not a cat. Right? So it cannot tell you what it is. It just reached a point where it's not trained to think or understand what it is. But at least it understands this doesn't look like what you've given me and you've fed me in the past. So basically, one of the best ways of predicting what might come in the future is training the machine with pulverizing amounts of data as to what happened in the past. And make it.
When I go onto a website and try and sign into a website, and it says, let's check you're a human, select all the squares that have got mountains in. That's exactly what I'm doing, isn't it? I'm helping someone to train their computer to recognize mountains.
In many cases, you are training machines. You will see a little square cut into even smaller squares, and in some of them you have a mountain, some of them you don't. So you're training machine to say, this person told me that these squares here contain a mountain. The other ones, it didn't say that it had a mountain. I don't know what those things are, but these are mountain. And even when you look at the CAPTCHA, half of the CAPTCHA machine knows what it is, and the other one it doesn't. So the first half it tests, are you telling me the truth? If you are, then tell me what the other ones are.
Yeah.
And so it's, by means of, I guess, using us, that's what it means that, when people harvest data, they're kind of using, the amount of data we produce every day by doing these sort of, I'm a human test, train their own machines to be better at detecting, certain things. But yeah, you're essentially helping a computer learn how to read pictures.
So rather than helping a computer to recognize what a cat is, I could help a computer to recognize what a dodgy client is.
Yes.
I could feed in data about their past payment record.
Exactly.
And the length of time they've been in business.
Exactly.
And as long as the computer's got enough data from elsewhere, if it can grab that data from 100 or 1,000 other businesses as well, then it can probably learn fairly quickly who's likely to pay and who isn't.
If you're in the business of loaning money, it's so easy to create a borrower profile, and based on all the profiles that you've had in the past, you figure out which ones are the ones that will be paying on time, which ones don't, which ones eventually default, and it's all based on not what I decide will be a good individual to loan to, but what computer says. The people that have borrowed money that have this profile in the past have a 90% chance of defaulting, and the ones that don't, they do. And you can program Python in less than an hour, feed it all the information, in a couple of days is fully informed of what you want, and you then tell it, there's a new person coming through the door, it has this and these characteristics, what is the percentage of, what will be the probability that this person won't pay me, and overall, what are my profits on this individual?
And I guess if I've got a little business selling bits and pieces of stuff on credit, this is going to help me to run a more. But if I've got a big business that sells credit insurance, then this becomes absolutely essential
Yes,
in keeping my competitive edge.
yes, yes. Yeah,
Because I
exactly.
need to be able to predict better than anyone else who's going to default if I want to make money underwriting insurance policies on this.
Absolutely. And for us, we're, on the surface, humans, we're very simple and we want simple things to understand. We either want a red light or a green light, but I want to feed you a huge amount of very complex data. And at the end of the day, I want to see, is Paul Jennings a red or a green light for me? Should I loan you money or should I not? Based on this pool of millions of people that have borrowed from me before.
Because although the data might be complex, the decision is binary at the end. You
Exactly.
get your loan or not.
Exactly. Exactly.
And you can complicate it a bit further by giving a qualified yes. So you might get a loan, but you might be charged a higher interest rate than someone else.
Yes.
So you get that relationship between risk and return, which is what the accountants always want to be able to use.
100%. Exactly. Yes.
So how else might I use this kind of resource in a business? Give me a business example of how I can use this sort of program to make better business decisions, because the accountant is busily trying to reinvent themselves. They've now got software that does all the compliance stuff. No accountant is sitting there doing journal entries anymore. No accountant is sitting there manually filling in tax computations. That is all done by software. The accountant can only now make their living by adding value. So how can I add value to my clients using this kind of resource now?
Ever increasingly we're moving online with sales and purchases, and it's important that we also understand that we need to move our software and adapt it to this online environment. So again, what happens online is that we have marketplaces and people are constantly bringing in new goods and they're trying to figure out, okay, I have this new product I've just designed or I bought from somewhere, I want to put it in this platform, and I would love to know what should be my starting price, or how should I sell it? How much should I sell it for in order to have some sort of successful transaction? What you can do, which is also really very easy, is to again grab a programming language like Python and go around this site and scrape all of the data, because it's usually freely available. Scrape the data of all the items that have been posted in this site, what type of item it is, how much it was sold for, because it came from somewhere, because the seller paid for shipping and handling. You take into account all of these variables. You crunch them all together. You teach your machine to think, now that I have this new product, I am offering to pay shipping and handling. It's made out of this material. What do you suggest should be the price that I should, post this particular item for on this particular website? Because you would have different websites with different clientele, and all of that can be done automatically by a computer, by just sort of, writing a few lines of code and scraping all the data that's sort of available online.
Interesting. About 20 plus years ago now, there was a headline in the Wall Street Journal that read, "When law invades accounting, clarity flees." And the headline was coming from case accountants and auditors in particular being sued for what may or may not be in the financial statements. And all the arguments in court weren't necessarily they weren't necessarily accounting or finance arguments. They were legal arguments about who had title to particular assets, whether or not those assets should be recognized, whether or not a particular charge over an asset was effective, how a liability was recognized in terms of who had claims on what. And the gist of the article was that the lawyers were effectively taking over the show. And all of the energy and time was being spent on legal arguments rather than accounting decisions, 20 years later, are we going to be in the same position with data? Am I going to be reading articles in a few years' time that says when data invades accounting, a clarity flees? Because if the accountant's decision is based on a program, can we really hold the accountant responsible for that decision, or should we be holding the programmer responsible for that decision?
Exactly, that is a brilliant question. There's a saying, obviously, that behind any program is a programmer, or a group of programmers. But it becomes so specialized. You have a programmer that works on a little piece of a program, and then another programmer that works on another piece. And are you going to blame them because perhaps their little bit fails, but they never really could have understood the consequence of the failure of their small little bit of program on the whole? So these are really big questions to ask. And you can see it a lot, for instance, in the world of automobiles. You have autonomous driving, which is exactly what, in a real sense, what's going on with real life. You have cars that are taking in data, and based on what they've learned from other bits of data, they're deciding, should I stop because the car in front of me is stopping? A child just, run across the road. I don't have enough time to brake. Should I try to veer to the side and avoid hitting this person? But then I will put the driver in danger. So all of these decisions, somebody has to make a premeditated decision in terms of the programming as to what should the car do and whose life is in danger, really. So are you blaming the car company? Are you blaming the programmers, the designers, the architects? Who is in charge of this? These are very big questions, and they're definitely going to bring some interesting questions in the future. But it's I believe from the programmer point of view, the task of a programmer is just to program, and how that code is used, that's entirely up to whoever is going to use it. Trying to get out of trouble as a programmer.
So on that note, if we're going to be doing a little bit of programming together next week, what are we actually going to be doing?
So we're going to be bringing that back right to the basics. So I want to introduce everybody to the basics of Python. I just want to introduce you to the language and how easy it is to understand and to give simple instructions. Python already comes with a few little tools to deal with very basic types of data. I want students to play around with this a little bit and write tiny little bits of code, the equivalent of hello world for maybe the first couple of hours. And then on week 9, I just want to show you how simply you can write a bit of code that could do some sort of 3-way check on receipts to make sure that everything is in order. And if there isn't, immediately tell me, where's the problem? How should I fix it? Why things are not panning out the way they should. But it's basically just, getting to know Python and, trying to remove a little bit of this obscurity of, programming. It's actually not bad at all. It's a lot of fun once you get into it.
I'm sure it is.